5-year-old boy sat on a pile of garbage bags on a frozen sidewalk, swung his legs the way a child swings them on a porch in summer, and asked his mother if they were going camping. 700 miles away, the man who owned that sidewalk watched it happen on live television, a forkful of $90 salmon halfway to his mouth. And for the first time in 20 years, he could not look away. It was not the boy shivering in the February wind that undid him. It was not the neighbors watching in silence from their stoops. It was the number bolted above the door behind the child, because that building belonged to him. And what Miles Ashford was about to uncover inside his own empire would break apart everything he believed about the man he had spent 2 decades becoming. Miles Ashford was 42 years old, the chief executive of Ashford Vantage Properties, a real estate empire of more than 14,000 units worth $2.6 billion. And on an ordinary Tuesday evening, he sat in his own kitchen and watched his own system destroy a family in real time. His penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower on Lakeshore Drive. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped every room, offering a view of Lake Michigan that stretched so far it looked like the edge of the world. The kitchen had Italian marble countertops that had never once seen a home-cooked meal. The wine cellar held 230 bottles, each one chosen by a sommelier Miles had met exactly once. The dining table seated 14. In 4 years of living there, not a single time had every chair been filled. Most nights, only one was. His name appeared on the lists. His face appeared at investor conferences. His signature appeared on contracts that decided where thousands of families would live, how much they would pay, and under what conditions they could be removed. But Miles Ashford had never walked the hallway of a building he owned. He had never stood inside one of his units. He had never met a single tenant, not one. In 20 years of real estate, he had never once looked a renter in the eye and asked whether the heat worked, whether the locks held, whether the roof leaked. He did not need to. That was what systems were for. Every property in the Ashford Vantage portfolio was run by third-party management firms, professional and efficient and distant. Miles read quarterly reports, revenue per unit, occupancy percentages, operating margins. Tenants were not names in his world. They were numbers on a spreadsheet, line items that either performed or did not. They cannot pay, he would say. They made bad choices, and that is not my problem to solve. He said it to his board. He said it to his chief operating officer. He said it to himself late at night, when the penthouse felt too large and too quiet, and the lake outside looked like a black mirror giving nothing back. He said it because his father had said it first, and his father had built everything Miles now stood on. Silas Ashford. The name still carried weight in Chicago real estate 7 years after his death. A man who had started with a single building on the South Side. A man who turned 12 units into 1,200 and 1,200 into 3,000, all before Miles finished college. Silas did not believe in sentiment. He believed in leases. He believed in margins. He believed that the moment you saw a tenant as a person instead of a contract, you had already lost. Sentiment is a luxury a landlord cannot afford, son, he used to say. The moment you start feeling sorry for people who cannot pay rent, you stop being a businessman and start being a fool. Miles had carried those words like scripture for 2 decades. Every decision passed through that lens. Every policy built to protect the portfolio and not the people inside it. And it had worked spectacularly. The empire had quadrupled since his father died. Revenue climbed every single year. The investors were pleased. The board was pleased. Miles told himself he was pleased too, but contentment does not echo, and that penthouse echoed constantly. He ate dinner alone that February evening. Grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, a glass of Burgundy that cost $90 a bottle. The television played across the room, the local evening news, though Miles was not watching. He never really watched. The television existed the way the dining table existed, to fill a space that would otherwise remind him how empty the room truly was. His phone buzzed with email. Board prep for the morning, a zoning dispute in Atlanta, quarterly figures from the Dallas properties. He scrolled with one hand and ate with the other, routine, mechanical, insulated. Miles was 14, the first time his father took him to a building on 63rd Street. It was January, cold enough that breath turned solid the second it left the lips. They walked through the front entrance, past a hallway that smelled of mildew and cooking grease, up a staircase where the railing wobbled under Miles's hand. On the second floor, a family was being moved out. A woman stood in the doorway holding a toddler on her hip. Behind her, two older children sat on garbage bags stuffed with clothes. The woman was crying quietly, the kind of crying that happens after you have already screamed, and nobody came. Miles stopped. He looked up at his father. "Can we help them?" he asked, and his voice was small. He was 14, and he still believed the world worked the way his teachers said it did. Silas did not slow down. He put a hand on his son's shoulder and kept walking. "You feel sorry," he said. "Good, that means you are human. Now learn to stop. Pity does not pay a mortgage. She did not pay her rent." That is the end of the story. Miles looked back over his shoulder. The toddler was chewing the zipper of a coat too thin for winter. The woman's eyes met his for half a second. Then his father's hand tightened and they turned the corner. That moment did not haunt Miles. That was the problem. He let it teach him exactly what his father intended. Stop feeling. Start counting. Build walls between yourself and the consequences of your decisions, and never let anyone tell you those walls are wrong. When Silas died of a stroke 7 years ago, Miles did not grieve by slowing down. He grieved by accelerating. He doubled the portfolio in 3 years and then doubled it again. He hired optimization firms and streamlined operations. He automated rent collection, late fees, maintenance requests, eviction filings. Every process ran through software. Every decision passed through policy. No exceptions, no conversations, no faces. He contracted Keystone Property Partners to manage the Philadelphia holdings. 47 buildings, more than 800 units. Miles signed the contract in his Chicago office without ever visiting a single one. He did not ask how Keystone handled late payments. He did not ask about their eviction timeline. He did not ask what happened to the families who fell behind. He did not need to ask. The numbers were good. The margins were healthy. That was the only language he had ever been taught to speak. He had built an empire designed so that he would never have to see the people inside it, until the news forced him to look. The image on the screen barely registered at first. Miles glanced up between bites, a street. "Winter Philadelphia," the ticker said. Some kind of commotion on a sidewalk. He almost looked away. He almost went back to his phone. But then the camera moved. A woman stood on the curb in a thin gray jacket, no hat, no gloves. February in Philadelphia, and she had no gloves. Behind her, piled on the concrete like debris after a storm, was everything she owned. A mattress leaning against a fire hydrant. Black garbage bags splitting at the seams, a laundry basket full of kitchen things, pots and plastic cups, a box of cereal tipped on its side. 2 children sat on the pile, a girl, maybe 9, wearing a school backpack, her arms wrapped around her knees. A boy, maybe 5, perched on a trash bag as though it were a chair, looking around with eyes too wide and too calm for what was happening around him. The reporter's voice cut through the noise. Tanya Brooks, a 34-year-old certified nursing assistant, was evicted from her apartment this morning, after falling 2 months behind on rent. Brooks, a single mother of 2, lost her position at a community hospital 4 months ago during budget cuts. She says she contacted her property management company 11 times requesting an extension. None of her calls were returned. Miles set down his fork. Something in the woman's posture held him, not collapse. Not performance, just stillness. The stillness of a person who had already fought every fight available to her, lost them all, and was now standing in the wreckage, trying to decide which direction to walk. The camera panned to the building behind her. 5 stories, brick, metal fire escapes, a number above the entrance. 2130. Miles did not blink. The reporter continued. This building is part of the Ashford Vantage portfolio, one of the largest residential real estate holdings in the country, owned by the developer Miles Ashford. His fork hit the plate. The sound of metal on porcelain rang through the penthouse like a bell in an empty church. Miles stood up and walked toward the television. His legs moved before his mind gave permission. 2130 Ridgemont Avenue. He opened his laptop and typed the address into the property management database. The screen loaded. Unit 312. Tenant, Tanya Brooks. Lease start, March of that year, 5 years prior, monthly rent, $1,150. Payment history, 58 out of 60 months paid on time. Missed November, missed December. Eviction filed on the 14th of January. Eviction executed on the 3rd of February. From missed payment to homeless in 6 weeks. That was all it took. 6 weeks to erase almost 5 years of a perfect record. 6 weeks to put a mother and 2 children on a frozen sidewalk surrounded by garbage bags. His building, his tenant, his system, his fault. Miles's hand hovered over the remote. On the screen, the reporter was interviewing a neighbor, but Miles was no longer listening to the neighbor. He was watching the children. The little girl, Nia, the reporter had called her, stood near her mother with the school backpack still strapped to her shoulders. 9 years old enough to understand that what was happening was wrong, old enough to feel the shame of it. She did not cry. She just stood there, holding the straps of her backpack as though they were the only solid thing left in her world. And the boy, Malik, 5 years old, sat on the garbage bag with his legs dangling, looking up at his mother with a question on his face that the microphone barely caught. "Mama, are we camping?" Something in Miles's chest cracked open. A 5-year-old boy sitting on the remains of his home, asking if this was an adventure, because that is what children do. They translate destruction into something they can survive. They build a story around a catastrophe because the truth is too large for a body that small. His mother had let him believe it. She had swallowed her own terror so completely that her son thought they were on a trip. She had held herself together with such ferocious grace that the worst day of her life looked, to a 5-year-old, like camping. The reporter kept talking, and the details piled up like evidence at a trial. Tanya Brooks had worked the night shift at a community hospital in North Philadelphia for 5 years. 5 years of 12-hour shifts. 5 years of waking at 4 in the afternoon, feeding her children, getting homework done, dropping them with a neighbor, and walking into a building full of suffering until sunrise. She had been laid off when the hospital cut its nursing assistant staff by 40%. Budget shortfalls, funding gaps, the kind of language that sounds clean in a boardroom and bleeds on the ground. After losing her job, she had applied to 47 positions in 4 months. 47. She had gotten 3 interviews. None of them hired her. The reason was always the same, spoken or unspoken. She needed flexible hours because she had 2 children and no child care. And in this country, needing flexibility as a single mother was not treated as a circumstance. It was treated as a disqualification. She had paid rent on time for 4 years and 10 months, 58 consecutive payments, never once late. Then November came and the savings ran dry. She had called Keystone Property Partners once, twice, 5 times, 11 times in total. She left voicemails. She sent emails. She walked into their office and sat in the lobby for 2 hours waiting to speak to someone. Nobody called back. Nobody met with her. Nobody offered a payment plan, a grace period, an extension, or even the dignity of a conversation. The system did not have a button for compassion. It only had a button for eviction, and someone pressed it. The reporter signed off. The segment ended. The anchor moved on to the weather. Miles reached for the remote and pressed the power button. The screen went black, but the image did not disappear. It burned behind his eyes. A woman standing in the cold. A girl gripping a backpack. A boy asking if they were camping. And an address that belonged to him. A child too young to understand eviction had accidentally given it the kindest name possible, an adventure, because his mother had never once let him see her fear. Miles stood in his penthouse. 3 floors, a view of the lake, 230 bottles of wine, a table for 14 with 1 chair pulled out. And somewhere in Philadelphia, a woman who had done everything right was going to sleep on a gym mat that night. Because his system had decided that 2 missed payments erased 5 years of proof that she was worth keeping. He sat back down at his desk long after the screen went dark. The penthouse was silent, except for the low hum of the heating and the wind pressing against the glass. He opened the laptop again, not email this time, not investor reports. He logged into the Ashford Vantage Master system, the platform he had paid $300,000 to build, the system that tracked every unit and every lease and every payment and every filing across 14,000 apartments in 6 cities. He typed the address once more. Unit 312, the file loaded, clean and organized and efficient. Exactly the way Keystone always delivered. The payment history scrolled down the screen like a heartbeat monitor. Green, 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 green. 58 months of green, on time, every single one. Then November red, December red, eviction filed, eviction executed. 2 red marks after 58 green ones, that was all it took. He clicked into the case notes. Keystone's internal log, 3 lines. Tenant non-responsive to payment reminders. Standard eviction protocol initiated per portfolio guidelines. Unit scheduled for turnover and market rate relisting. Non-responsive, he stared at that word. The reporter had said Tanya called 11 times. 11 calls, 11 voicemails, a woman sitting in a lobby for 2 hours, and the system called her non-responsive. Was it a person who decided not to call back? Was it a policy? Was it a machine that sorted her into a queue nobody ever checked? Miles did not know. And that was the ugliest part, that he did not know, because he had designed his empire so that he would never have to. Father's voice surfaced the way it always did, quiet and certain and immovable. She did not pay. The system worked. Sentiment is a luxury, son. Miles heard it, and for the first time in 20 years, he did not nod along. The system had worked. That was the problem. It had worked exactly the way he built it to work. Fast, clean, no exceptions, no conversations, no second chances. A machine that turned human beings into line items and erased them when the numbers stopped performing. The system was not broken. The system was functioning perfectly, and it had just put a mother and 2 children on a frozen sidewalk. He picked up his phone. Not to call his lawyer. Not to call his publicist. Not to call anyone who could make this go away quietly. He called his driver. "I need a flight to Philadelphia," he said. "First thing tomorrow morning. 6 o'clock if you can find one." "I notify your office, sir?" the driver asked. "No, your assistant." "No, just the flight." He hung up. He did not pack a bag. He did not write a plan. He did not call his chief operating officer. For 20 years, every decision Miles has made had passed through layers of protection, advisors and contracts and policies built to keep him safe from the consequences of his own choices. Not tomorrow. Tomorrow, he was going alone. For 20 years, he had built walls between himself and his tenants. In one night, a news camera had blown a hole through every single one of them. He stood at the window a long time, staring at the black lake. And for the first time in 2 decades, the silence in his penthouse did not feel like peace. It felt like evidence. The flight landed at Philadelphia International at 7:42 the next morning. Miles had slept perhaps 90 minutes, spending the rest of the night staring at the ceiling of his penthouse, seeing a boy on a garbage bag asking his mother if they were camping. He had arranged a car, a black sedan with tinted windows, and he gave the driver the address but told him to stop 2 blocks away. He wanted to walk. He needed to feel the distance between his world and the one he had been profiting from. The neighborhood announced itself gradually. First, the buildings got shorter. Then the sidewalks got rougher. Cracks in the concrete filled with frozen rainwater. A corner store with a neon sign missing half its letters. A laundromat with bars on the windows. A bus stop bench with the backrest torn away. Miles walked through all of it in a cashmere overcoat that cost $1,200 and Oxford shoes that had never touched a surface rougher than polished marble. He looked like a man who had taken a very wrong turn, and in a way he had 20 years ago. He saw the building before he reached it. 2130 Ridgemont Avenue. 5 stories, 48 units, red brick gone gray from decades of exhaust and neglect. The fire escapes were rusted. 2 windows on the 3rd floor were covered with cardboard and tape. The front door was propped open with a cinder block, because the lock had been broken so long that nobody bothered to report it anymore. Miles stood on the sidewalk and stared at a building he owned. a building that generated $420,000 a year in rent. A building he had never once visited. He walked inside. The hallway was not dim. It was dark. 3 of the 4 overhead lights were dead. The floor was peeling at the edges. Water stains spread down the walls from the ceiling like bruises. The air smelled of mildew and cooking oil and something metallic that might have been old pipes. The elevator wore an out-of-order sign, the tape gone yellow with age. Miles took the stairs. The railing wobbled under his grip. On the 2nd floor, landing, a roach crossed his path without hurrying. It was not afraid of him. Nothing in this building was afraid of its owner. Nobody here even knew who he was. He knocked on the first door he came to. No answer. He knocked on the 2nd. The chain rattled and the door opened 3 inches. An elderly woman peered through the gap. Dark skin, silver hair pulled back tight, eyes sharp enough to cut glass. "Can I help you?" she asked. Not friendly, not hostile, just careful. The careful of someone who had learned that a stranger in a nice coat usually meant trouble. "My name is Miles," he said, and he left off the last name. "I am looking into conditions in this building. I work with the ownership group." The woman studied him for a long moment. Then she opened the door wider. "Come in then," she said. "I have got plenty to show you." Her name was Estelle Monroe, 71 years old. She had lived in Unit 204 for 12 years and 3 months. She knew because she counted. She counted everything. Days without heat, weeks without repairs, months since anyone from management had returned a call. "The heat has been broken 3 weeks," she said, leading him into a living room where a space heater hummed in the corner. 3 weeks in February. I called Keystone 6 times. You know what they told me? They said they would send someone. Nobody came. They only send letters about the rent. Miles looked around the apartment. The ceiling above the kitchen had a brown stain spreading outward like a slow explosion. The faucet dripped into a pot set beneath it. A gap in the window frame whistled cold air, stuffed with a rolled-up towel. This was a unit generating $1,150 a month. This was what that money was buying. Not maintenance, not safety, not dignity, just extraction. "Did you know Tanya Brooks?" he asked. Unit 312. Estelle's expression changed, softening and hardening at the same time. "That girl worked harder than anyone in this building," she said. "Night shifts, double shifts. Her babies were always clean, always polite, always had their homework done. She used to check on me when she got home in the morning, 6 o'clock. Knocking on my door just to be sure I was all right." Estelle paused and her jaw tightened. She did not deserve what they did to her. None of us do. We pay our rent. We keep our heads down. And they treat us like we are disposable, like the building matters and the people inside it do not. Miles did not answer. He stood in that dark hallway after leaving her apartment and pressed his back against the wall. The plaster was cold through his coat. Somewhere above him a pipe clanked. Somewhere below a child laughed. 14,000 units. 6 cities, $2.6 billion. And this was what it looked like from the inside. Not a portfolio, not a spreadsheet, not a quarterly report. A building where an old woman stuffed towels into a window frame to survive the winter. He had built his empire from the top down and had never once looked at it from the bottom up. Until now. He left the building and drove straight to the regional office of Keystone Property Partners on Callowhill Street. No appointment, no warning. He walked through the front door in his $1,200 coat and asked the receptionist for the regional manager. Ron Feldman came out 7 minutes later. Mid-50s, thinning hair, a smile trained in customer service seminars. He did not know why Miles Ashford was standing in his lobby. He did not know about the newscast. He did not know about Estelle. He just saw a billionaire client and started to sweat. "Mr. Ashford, what an unexpected pleasure," he said. "If I had known you were coming, I would have. Show me the eviction process for the Philadelphia properties," Miles said. "No greeting, no small talk, start to finish, every step." Ron blinked. "Of course, right this way." They sat in a conference room with fluorescent lights and a whiteboard covered in property codes. Ron pulled up the process on his laptop and walked through it like a sales pitch. Rent due on the first grace period through the 5th, a late fee applied on day 6, $75 a day. Miles stopped him. 75 a day, he repeated. Industry standard for the region, Ron said. It is within legal limits. Miles did the math in his head. A tenant who missed a single month of rent, $1,150, would accumulate more than $2,000 in late fees within 30 days. Which meant that by the time the eviction was filed, the tenant no longer owed 1 month of rent. They owed the equivalent of 3, a hole almost impossible to climb out of. What happens after 30 days of non-payment, Miles asked. We file for eviction, Ron said. Standard protocol. Is there any step between the late fee and the filing, Miles asked. Any outreach, any call to the tenant? Ron hesitated. We send automated notices, text, and email, and if the tenant calls, Miles said. Another pause, longer this time. We process over 800 units in this region, Mr. Ashford. Our team handles calls as capacity allows. We cannot make individual exceptions without compromising operational efficiency. Every year in this country, more than 3.6 million eviction cases are filed. The vast majority of the tenants facing them have no lawyer. Many do not even understand the legal process happening to them until a sheriff shows up at the door. In cities where the housing courts are overloaded and legal aid is underfunded, the system is not built to protect tenants. It is built to process them quickly and quietly and efficiently. For companies like Keystone, eviction is not a last resort. It is a business tool. Remove a tenant paying below market rate. Renovate the unit with minimal upgrades. Relist it at a higher price. Turnover is not a failure of the system. Turnover is the system. And the people who own the buildings almost never see it happening because they are not supposed to. That is the whole point. Pull up Tanya Brooks's file, Miles said. Ron typed and the file appeared. He read from the screen the way a man reads a parking ticket. Unit 312, non-payment November and December. Eviction filed the 14th of January, executed the 3rd of February. Standard protocol. Paid on time for 4 years and 10 months, Miles said, his voice flat. 58 consecutive months. She lost her job. He called this office 11 times asking for an extension. Your team never called her back, not once. Ron shifted in his seat. Mr. Ashford, I understand your concern, but we follow the protocols agreed upon in our management contract. The same contract your team approved and signed. There it was. The sentence Miles had been circling since the night before. The contract your team approved. The protocols your company authorized. The system you paid us to run. Miles sat in silence for a long moment. Ron watched him, waiting for the explosion that never came. Because Miles was not angry at Ron Feldman. Ron was doing exactly what he had been hired to do. Exactly what the contract specified. Exactly what the quarterly review rewarded. Ron had said they could not make exceptions, but Miles heard the word differently now. Not could not. Would not. They would not make exceptions because the system rewarded efficiency over empathy, speed over humanity, turnover over tenancy. And Miles had built that system, signed that contract, approved the terms, cashed the checks. He had not merely watched an eviction on the news. He had funded it. He stood and he left the office without another word. He sat in the back of the sedan for 10 minutes, staring at his phone, before he asked the driver one question. Is there a church shelter nearby that takes families? The driver found it in 30 seconds. Bethel Crossing Church, emergency family shelter, capacity for 40 beds, currently housing 60 people. Miles told him to drive there. Then he did something he had not done in 20 years. He took off his overcoat, folded it, and left it on the seat. He loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves. Not because it would fool anyone. A man in a $1,500 shirt with the sleeves rolled up still looks like a man in a $1,500 shirt. But because the coat felt like armor, and where he was going armor was the wrong thing to wear. The shelter was in the basement of the church. Fluorescent lights, folding tables, cots lined up in rows like a field hospital. The air smelled of instant coffee and industrial cleaner and too many bodies in too small a space. Children sat on the floor coloring with broken crayons. A woman near the entrance argued quietly with a volunteer about blanket allocation. Miles scanned the room. It did not take long to find her. Tanya Brooks sat in the far corner, not on a cot, on the floor, her back against the cinder block wall. Nia slept beside her, curled under a thin blanket with her school backpack tucked beneath her head like a pillow. Malik was asleep too, his head on his mother's thigh, his small fingers wrapped around the zipper of a jacket that was not warm enough for February. Tanya was not sleeping. She was writing, a pen in one hand, a crumpled sheet of paper balanced on her knee. Miles watched her for a moment before he approached. She was filling out a job application by hand because she had no computer, because she had no library card anymore, because when you lose your address, you lose access to almost everything that requires one. He walked over slowly. She looked up before he got within 10 feet. Her eyes locked onto him with the precision of a person who had learned to measure threats quickly. She did not smile. She did not flinch. She just watched. "Can I help you?" she asked. It was not a question. It was a boundary. "My name is Miles," he said, and he paused. The last name stayed in his throat. "I heard about what happened to you on the news. I wanted to see if there was anything I could do." Tanya's expression did not change. She had heard this before. The volunteers, the church members, the well-meaning strangers who showed up with sympathy and left with a clean conscience. "I do not need your pity," she said. Her voice was steady, not angry, not grateful, just clear. "I need a job. I need a door that locks. I need my kids to stop sleeping on gym mats. Can you do any of that?" Miles opened his mouth and closed it again. He could not remember the last time anyone had spoken to him without deference, without calculation, without wanting something from him in return. Tanya was not asking for charity. She was issuing a challenge. "Meet me where I actually am or leave." "I might be able to help with some of that," Miles said carefully. "If you will let me." Tanya studied him. Her eyes moved from his shoes to his watch to his hands. She was reading him the way he read a balance sheet, quickly and accurately and without sentiment. "Everybody wants to help," she said quietly. "Nobody wants to fix anything. People hand you a sandwich and feel like heroes. But nobody asks why a woman who worked 5 years of night shifts is sitting on a church floor with her children. Nobody asks how the system broke her. They just want the version of the story where they showed up and made it better." Miles felt that land somewhere deep, not in his pride, in his guilt, because she had just described exactly what he had walked in planning to do. "You are right," he said. "I am not here to hand you a sandwich." "Then what are you here for?" she said. He did not have a clean answer, not yet, so he told the only truth available to him. "I am here because I saw your son ask if you were camping, and I have not been able to close my eyes since." Something shifted in Tanya's face. Not trust, not softness, but the faintest crack in the wall she had built around herself, the acknowledgement that this stranger had seen the one moment she had tried hardest to hide. She did not invite him to sit. She did not thank him. She just looked at him for a long time, then went back to writing her application. Miles stood there, awkward and useless, a billionaire in a church basement with no idea what to do with his hands. Tanya Brooks did not look broken. She looked exhausted, which was worse, because broken people stop, and exhausted people keep going until they collapse. Tanya did not tell her story all at once. It came out in pieces over the days that followed. A sentence here while Naya colored at the shelter table. A memory there while Malik napped on her lap. Not because she was hiding anything, but because telling your whole story at once requires a kind of energy that homelessness steals from you in the first week and never gives back. She had grown up in West Philadelphia, 52nd and Walnut, a row house with 3 bedrooms and a front porch where her mother hung wind chimes made from old spoons. Her mother, Loretta, cleaned houses for wealthy families out in Chestnut Hill 6 days a week, her hands raw from bleach, her knees worn from scrubbing floors that were not hers. Tanya's father left when she was 7. No note, no phone call, just an empty closet and a silence that filled the house like smoke. Loretta raised her alone, worked doubles when the bills got heavy, never complained, never asked for help, and taught her daughter one thing above all others. You work, you pay your own way, you do not owe anybody, and nobody owes you. Tanya graduated high school. There was no money for college, so she earned her certified nursing assistant license at 20 and started working at a community hospital in North Philadelphia. Night shifts, 12 hours, 8 in the evening until 8 in the morning. The pay was not much, $14.60 an hour, but it was steady, it was honest, and it was hers. She met Reggie when she was 25. A construction worker with big hands and a quiet voice, the kind of man who fixed things without being asked and never took the credit. They had Nia a year later. Malik came 4 years after that. They were not married. They did not need a paper to know what they were. They were a family, stable and functional and real. Then Reggie fell from scaffolding on a job site across the river in Camden. 3 stories. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. He was 31 years old, no life insurance, no workers' compensation, because the contractor had classified him as an independent worker. No savings beyond 2 months of rent, because every dollar they earned went to keeping the family fed and housed and clothed and alive. Tanya was 31, with 2 children and a grief so heavy it bent her spine, but she did not stop. She could not. There was no one else. Her mother had passed 2 years before Reggie. No siblings, no cousins nearby, no safety net except her own 2 hands, and a job that paid $14.60 an hour. She managed for 2 years. Estelle Monroe watched the children while Tanya worked. Tanya checked on Estelle every morning when she got home, a quiet exchange of survival between 2 women who understood that sometimes all you have in this world is the person across the hall. Then the hospital cut its budget. 40% of the nursing assistant staff gone. Tanya got the letter on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, she was filling out applications. By the end of the month, she had submitted a dozen. By the end of October, 26. By December, 47. 3 interviews, 3 rejections, the same question every time, spoken or unspoken. Can you work nights, weekends, holidays? Do you have child care? And the answer was always complicated, because child care in this country costs on average more than $1,000 a month, almost exactly what her rent was. You cannot pay for child care without a job, and you cannot get a job without child care. That is not a paradox. That is a trap, and millions of single parents are caught in it right now, today. Tanya had exactly 2 months of savings when she lost her job. 60 days of breathing room. That was all that separated her from the sidewalk. The savings ran out in November. Rent was due. She did not have it. She called Keystone. No answer. She called again and again. She sold the television first, $80 for a set that had cost $300. Then the bed frame, and she slept on the floor so Nia and Malik could keep theirs. Then her old phone, $45. Then the microwave, $20. Each thing she sold was a piece of the life she had built with Reggie. Each receipt was a small funeral for a version of herself. She was losing one object at a time. But she never sold the children's things. Never Nia's books. Never Malik's toy trucks. Because those were the only evidence her children had that childhood still existed. December came. Rent due again. Nothing left to sell. She walked into Keystone's office and sat in the lobby for 2 hours. Nobody came out. She left a handwritten note explaining her situation, her work history, her payment record, the layoff, the applications, everything laid bare on a single sheet of paper. Nobody responded, and then something happened that Miles would carry with him for the rest of his life. Nia, 9 years old, started hiding food at school. Crackers from the cafeteria slipped into her backpack when no one was looking. Granola bars tucked into her coat pocket. A juice box saved from lunch and brought home for Malik, a 9-year-old who had learned that love meant smuggling crackers, who understood that her brother was hungry before her mother could figure out how to say it. Tanya found the crackers one evening, crumbled at the bottom of Nia's backpack. She sat on the kitchen floor of the apartment she was about to lose and pressed her hands over her mouth so her children would not hear her cry. Miles visited the shelter 3 more times that week. He brought groceries, a warm coat for Malik, new shoes for Nia because her old ones had a hole in the left sole she had been stuffing with napkins. He did not announce himself, did not make speeches. He just showed up, left things, and sat with the children while Tanya filled out her applications. Nia warmed to him first. She showed him her drawings. Butterflies, mostly, and houses. Always houses. Every picture had a house in it somewhere, a square with a triangle on top and a door with a handle. The most basic architecture of safety drawn over and over by a child who no longer had one. Malik was shy, but on the third visit he climbed onto the bench beside Miles and handed him a broken crayon. "You can have the blue one," he said. "Blue is for the sky." Miles took the crayon and his hand was shaking, and he did not know why a 5-year-old handing him a broken crayon felt heavier than signing a $200 million acquisition. But it did. Tanya watched all of it with careful eyes. She was beginning to trust him. Not fully, not freely, but the way you trust a bridge that looks sturdy enough to hold you for one more crossing. She let him sit. She let him help. She let him exist in the margins of her crisis without demanding that he explain himself. Then one afternoon, the television in the shelter common area was tuned to a business news channel, a segment on commercial real estate. A name on the screen, Ashford Vantage Properties, and a face she recognized, Miles Ashford, chief executive, owner of 14,000 residential units across 6 cities. Tanya stared at the screen. The camera showed a building, then another, then a graphic listing the portfolio, Philadelphia Holdings, Ridgemont Avenue. She felt her blood go cold. Not cold like winter, cold like betrayal, the kind that starts in the stomach and spreads outward until the fingers go numb and the jaw locks, and every word you have ever said to the person in front of you replays with a new and sickening meaning. Miles arrived that evening carrying a bag of groceries and a children's book for Malik. He walked through the door the way he had all week, carefully and quietly, like a man trying to earn a space he had not yet been given. Tanya stood near the entrance, arms crossed, her face still. The kind of stillness that does not mean calm. It means a storm has already formed and is choosing the exact moment to land. "You're him," she said. Miles stopped. "You own that building. 2130 Ridgemont. You own it." He set the bag down slowly. "Yes," he said. "You are the reason my kids are sleeping on gym mats. You, not some faceless company, not some system. You." Miles did not step back, did not look away, did not reach for an excuse or a justification or any of the 1,000 deflections his lawyers had trained him to deploy. "Yes," he said. "I own the building. I did not know what was happening inside it." He paused, but that is not an excuse. "That is the problem." Tanya's voice dropped, quiet now, and the quiet was worse than shouting. "You came here to feel better about yourself," she said. "You wanted to play the hero so you could sleep at night. Bring groceries. Buy shoes. Go home and tell yourself you are one of the good ones." Each word hit like a stone dropped from a height, precise and heavy and deserved. "You wanted to be the savior of your own guilt," she said. "I have seen men like you my whole life. You break something and then you show up with flowers." Miles stood in the middle of that shelter, surrounded by cots and broken crayons and the smell of industrial soap, and he absorbed every word she threw at him. Not because he was strong, because she was right. "Maybe," he said, "maybe that is exactly what I did. Maybe I came here because watching that report made me feel something I had not felt in 20 years, and I did not know what to do with it except show up." Took a breath. "But I am here now, and I am not leaving until I fix what I broke. Not because it makes me good, because it makes me responsible." Tanya stared at him, her jaw tight, her eyes dry. She had cried enough in the last 3 months to last a lifetime, and she was not going to waste another tear on a billionaire's guilt. She turned and walked away and did not say another word. She walked back to her corner where Nia and Malik were sitting on a cot. But Nia had been watching, those 9-year-old eyes that had already seen too much. She looked at Miles from across the room, and the question she asked traveled 15 feet through the shelter air and landed on his chest like a fist. "Are you the man who took our home?" Miles could not answer. His throat closed, his eyes burned. He stood there in a church basement holding a children's book and a bag of groceries, and he understood that a 9-year-old had just asked him the only question that mattered. If this story is making you feel something, take a second to subscribe, because what happens next changes everything. Let us continue. Miles left the shelter that night and drove to his hotel in Center City, A suite on the 14th floor, king bed, marble bathroom, a room service menu on the nightstand. He sat on the edge of the bed and did not move for a long time. Then he opened his laptop, not to check email, not to review reports. He logged into the Ashford Vantage Master system and began pulling data he had never once looked at in 20 years of ownership. Eviction filings, all properties, all cities, the last 12 months, the number loaded on the screen. 847. 847 families evicted from Ashford Vantage properties in a single year. He clicked deeper. Household composition of the evicted tenants. 63% were single-parent households. More than 6 out of 10 mothers and fathers trying to raise children alone, and his system had put them on the street. He kept clicking. Time from first missed payment to eviction. 41% were evicted within 60 days of their first late payment. 2 months, the same timeline as Tanya. Average tenancy of the evicted renters before the missed payment, 3.2 years. These were not people who moved in and stopped paying. These were people who had lived in his buildings for years, paid faithfully, and then hit one bad stretch that the system refused to forgive. His father's voice rose from the place it always lived, that quiet shelf at the back of his skull where Silas Ashford's lessons sat like commandments carved in stone. The numbers work, son. That is all that matters. You cannot run a business on feelings. Miles stared at the screen. 847. He said the number out loud in the empty hotel room, and the sound of it echoed off walls that cost $400 a night to sleep between. No, he said, and his voice sounded different, harder, clearer, like a man pulling a knife out of his own chest. The numbers worked for me. They destroyed everyone else. He had spent 20 years believing he was building wealth. He had been building wreckage. The only difference between him and a storm was that he sent invoices. He picked up his phone. It was 2 in the morning. He called his chief operating officer, Curtis Hale, in Chicago. Curtis answered on the 4th ring, groggy and confused. Miles, it is 2 in the morning. What is? Freeze every eviction in the portfolio, Miles said, effective immediately. Silence on the line. Then Curtis's voice suddenly wide awake. Miles, that is 14,000 units across 6 cities. Do you have any idea what the legal liability? I said freeze them, Miles said. Every single one. No new filings, no pending executions. Nothing moves until I say so. The board is going to. The board answers to me, Miles said. And right now I am telling you that not one more family gets put on the street by this company until I have personally reviewed how we got here. That clear. A pause. Crystal, Curtis said. Miles hung up. He closed the laptop. He sat in the dark a long time. Somewhere in this city, Tanya Brooks was lying on a gym mat, her children pressed against her sides, wondering whether the man who had taken her home was also the man trying to give it back. And somewhere in his chest, in the place where his father's voice used to live, there was silence. Not peace, not yet, but silence. And silence, after 20 years of the wrong voice telling you the wrong things, is the first step toward hearing something true. I want to stop the story here for a moment, because there is something underneath it that took me years to understand, and I think it is the most valuable thing I can hand you. We like to imagine that harm on this scale requires a villain, a cruel man rubbing his hands together, deciding to ruin someone. But Miles Ashford never decided to evict Tanya Brooks. He never saw her name. That is the whole horror of it. The largest cruelties of our time are almost never committed by a person looking their victim in the eye. They are delegated. They are automated. They are buried 3 contracts, deep in a clause. Nobody reads. Carried out by a piece of software at 2 in the morning while the owner sleeps 700 miles away beneath a painting worth more than the building. Here is the idea I most want you to leave with. Wealth, past a certain point, stops being money. It becomes distance. Buys you walls and layers and assistants and management firms and a penthouse so high the street turns into an abstraction. The most dangerous thing distance buys is not luxury. It is the ability to not know. Miles did not build his empire so that he could hurt people. He built it so that he would never have to watch. That is a quieter kind of choice, and it is the one most of us actually make. Not the choice to be cruel, the choice not to look. Because the uncomfortable truth, and I include myself in this, is that most of us are Miles far more often than we are Tanya. We live on top of systems whose bottom floors we have carefully arranged never to visit. The eviction did not require Miles to be a monster. It only required him to be comfortable, and comfort is one of the most effective anesthetics ever invented. 3 days passed before Tanya called. Miles had gone back to the shelter twice, and both times she refused to see him. He did not push. He left an envelope with volunteer and asked that it be given to her when she was ready. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No apology, no speech, just information. A 2-bedroom apartment, Unit 409, same building, 2130 Ridgemont Avenue, fully renovated, new heating system, new locks, new paint, furnished with the basics, rent-free for 6 months. After that, a graduated payment plan based on income, never more than 30% of whatever she earned. No late fees, no penalties, no keystone. Below that was a second section, a job placement program at Fairmount University Hospital. Nursing assistant positions available, flexible scheduling for parents, an on-site childcare subsidy, an interview already arranged if she wanted it. The bottom of the page, one handwritten line. This is not charity. This is what was owed. Tanya called on a Tuesday evening. Miles answered before the first ring finished. I am doing this for Nia and Malik, she said. No greeting, no small talk, her voice flat and deliberate. Not for you. Not because I forgive you. Not because I believe you. I am doing this because my daughter is hiding crackers in her backpack and my son does not remember what a bed feels like. That is the only reason. I know, Miles said, and I would not trust you if you forgave me this easily. Silence on the line, a long one. Then Tanya spoke again, quieter. When can we see it? Tomorrow, he said. Whenever you are ready. The renovation had taken 72 hours. Miles had brought in a crew of 12. New drywall where the old plaster crumbled. A heating unit that actually worked. Windows that sealed. A kitchen faucet that did not drip. New locks on every door, deadbolt and chain, because when you have lost your home once, the first thing you need is not furniture. It is the sound of a lock clicking shut behind you. The apartment was simple, not luxurious. Laminate counters, basic carpet, a couch from a warehouse store, a kitchen table with 4 chairs. But it was clean, it was warm, and it was safe. Nia walked in first. She moved through the apartment slowly, touching everything, the walls, the light switches, the refrigerator door. She opened it and closed it 3 times. Then she walked into the smaller bedroom and stopped. A twin bed with a purple comforter, a small desk with a lamp, a bookshelf empty and waiting to be filled. Mama, she said, is this my room? Yes, baby, Tanya said, just yours. Nia sat on the bed and pressed her hand flat against the comforter. Then she lay back and stared at the ceiling like she was memorizing it, like she needed proof that it would still be there when she closed her eyes. Malik ran in a minute later. He found the second bedroom, a small bed with a blue blanket, a plastic bin of building blocks in the corner. He climbed onto the mattress and bounced once, twice. Then he looked up at his mother with those wide 5-year-old eyes. Mama, he said, is this our home for real or are we just visiting? Miles was standing in the hallway. He heard the question and had to turn away. A 5-year-old boy who had lost the concept of home so completely that he could not tell the difference between living somewhere and passing through. A child who had learned that everything could be taken at any moment, so he had stopped believing anything could stay. Tanya knelt down and held Malik's face in both her hands. This is our home, baby, she said. For real. We are staying. Malik searched her face for the truth the way children do, not with logic but with instinct. Then he nodded slowly, like he wanted to believe her, but was not quite ready to let go of the caution that had kept him safe. Tanya stood and walked to the living room window. She looked out at the small playground behind the building, rusted swings, a basketball hoop with no net, nothing fancy but outside, in the air, with sunlight. She did not cry. She did not speak. She just stood there and breathed in and out, slowly, like someone remembering how to fill her lungs without calculating whether she could afford to exhale. For the first time in 4 months, Tanya Brooks took a breath that did not carry the weight of tomorrow. That single breath, quiet and ordinary and invisible to everyone except the woman taking it, was worth more than every dollar in Miles Ashford's empire. Miles did not just fix one apartment, he dismantled the machine. The first call he made when he got back to Chicago was to the corporate office of Keystone Property Partners. Not to negotiate, not to renegotiate terms. To terminate, effective immediately, every property, every city, every contract. His legal team pushed back. His chief operating officer pushed back. His chief financial officer sent a 12-page memo outlining the financial risk of severing ties with the largest third-party management firm in the portfolio. Miles read the memo. Then he read Tanya's tenant file again, 58 months of on-time payments, 11 unanswered calls. 6 weeks from stable to homeless. He chose the tenant file. In place of Keystone, he built something new, an in-house property management division with a single rule that overrode every other policy in the handbook. Before any eviction filing could be submitted, 3 conditions had to be met. First, a minimum of 3 direct in-person contact attempts with the tenant. Not emails, not automated texts. A human being knocking on a door and asking what happened. Second, a free financial counseling session offered to every tenant who fell behind, not mandatory, just available. Third, a 30-day review period in which a tenant advocate, not a lawyer, not a property manager, but someone whose entire job was to represent the renter, would assess whether the situation was temporary or permanent. 3 steps. That was all it took. 3 steps that Keystone had never taken because 3 steps cost time and time cost money, and money was the only language the old system spoke. Miles hired tenant advocates for every building in the portfolio, 1 per property. Their job was simple: stand between management and the people living inside the walls. Listen, translate, protect. Not protect the asset, protect the human. He created an emergency hardship fund. Any tenant who could show a sudden loss of income, a layoff letter, a medical bill, a death in the family could apply for a 90-day grace period. No late fees, no penalties, no eviction proceedings. Just time. Because what Miles had learned from Tanya, what her 11 unanswered phone calls had taught him, was that most people who fall behind on rent do not need charity. They need time. 60 days, 90 days, enough room to find new footing before the ground disappears entirely. A handful of cities across the country have already figured this out. In places like Kansas City and Cleveland and Philadelphia, pilot programs now guarantee tenants the right to a free lawyer when they face eviction. It is called the right to counsel, and the results are not subtle. In cities where tenants have legal representation, eviction rates have dropped by as much as 70%. Not because the tenant suddenly had more money, but because when someone actually looks at a case, when someone asks questions and demands documentation and challenges the process, most evictions fall apart. They were never about justice, they were about speed. Miles could not change national policy, but he could change 14,000 doors. 6 months after the overhaul, the numbers came in. Eviction filings across the entire Ashford Vantage portfolio had dropped by 78%. Tenant retention had risen by 34%. Revenue dipped 3% in the short term. But the costs nobody ever talked about, the costs of turnover, the renovation between tenants, the legal fees, the court filings, the lost rent during vacancy, the advertising for new renters, all of that dropped by 41%. The math was clear. Keeping people in their homes was cheaper than throwing them out. Miles sat in his Chicago office looking at the quarterly report, a spreadsheet, numbers, the same language he had spoken his entire career. But for the first time, the numbers told a story he was proud of. Not just profit, proof. Proof that decency and efficiency were not enemies. Proof that his father's philosophy, the one that called sentiment a luxury, had been wrong, not just morally, but mathematically. Compassion, it turned out, was not only moral, it was profitable. His father had been wrong about that too. Tanya started at Fairmount University Hospital on a Monday in March. Night shift, 8 in the evening to 8 in the morning, the same hours she had worked for 5 years. The same scrubs, the same sore feet by 3 in the morning, the same fluorescent lights and beeping monitors, and patients who needed someone to show up when no one else would. But everything else was different. This time when she left for work, Nia and Malik were not being watched by a neighbor doing a favor. They were enrolled in an after-school program at their elementary school, structured and supervised, funded in part by the same foundation Miles had quietly set up to support working parents in his buildings. Daya did her homework at a real desk. Malik built towers out of wooden blocks and knocked them down laughing. And when Tanya came home at 8:30 in the morning, she did not collapse onto a bare floor. She walked into an apartment that was hers, a door that locked, a refrigerator with food in it, heat that worked. She did not celebrate. She went to work. That is what Tanya Brooks did. She worked. Within 2 months, she had been moved from the overnight float pool to a permanent position on the medical surgical unit. Her supervisor noted that her patient scores were among the highest on the floor. Not because she was trying to impress anyone, but because she knew what it felt like to lie in a bed, scared, with no one answering your calls. Treated every patient the way she wished Keystone had treated her, like a person, not a number. Then she did something that made Miles go quiet when she told him. She enrolled in the licensed practical nurse program, online classes through a community college. Tuition partially covered by a workforce development grant. The rest she paid herself, $50 a month pulled from a paycheck that did not have $50 of room in it. But she found it anyway because Tanya Brooks had never once in her life waited for someone to hand her a future. She studied after the children went to sleep, every night from 11 until 1 in the morning, sometimes later. Textbooks open on the kitchen table, flashcards spread across the counter. Anatomy, pharmacology, patient assessment. Her handwriting filled notebook after notebook in tight, careful letters. One morning, Miles came by to drop off books for Naya and found a sticky note on the kitchen table. Pink paper, crayon handwriting, letters crooked and misspelled in the way only a 9-year-old can make beautiful. "You can do it, Mama. I love you, Nia." Tanya had saved it. She had taped it to the wall above her study area, like a diploma she had not yet earned but was working toward every single night. Miles visited once a month, not announced, not formal. He brought books for Nia, who was devouring everything she could find about marine biology, and building sets for Malik, who had decided he wanted to be an architect, though he pronounced it architect. And for Tanya, he brought the only thing that mattered, consistency. He showed up. He did not disappear. He did not lose interest. He did not move on to the next cause or the next headline or the next version of guilt relief. He showed up, month after month, not as a savior, not as a landlord, just as a man who had broken something and was still standing in the wreckage, helping clean it up. One evening, 7 months after Tanya had moved back in, they sat at her kitchen table while Nia read on the couch and Malik slept in his room. Tanya poured coffee into mismatched mugs and looked at Miles for a long time before she spoke. "I still do not fully forgive you," she said. "Maybe I never will. What happened to us? What your company did, it changed my children. Nia still hides food sometimes. Malik still asks me every morning if we are staying. That does not go away because the heat works now." Miles nodded. He did not argue, did not explain, he just listened. "But I respect that you stayed," Tanya said. "Most people who feel guilty write a check and disappear. You stayed. That counts. For something. Not everything, but something." Miles looked at the sticky note on the wall, Nia's crooked handwriting, a child's love spelled out in crayon, and he thought about his father's penthouse, the art on the walls worth millions, the wine cellar, the marble, the glass. None of it had ever said anything as true as that pink sticky note. "Thank you," he said, and he meant it more than he had ever meant those 2 words in his life. Not thank you for forgiving me, because she had not. Thank you for letting me stay. Tanya's story is not rare. That is the part that should keep you up at night. It is not an outlier. It is not an exception. It is the most invisible crisis in this country, happening every single day in every single city, and most of us never see it, because the people it happens to do not make the news. Every year, 3.6 million eviction cases are filed in the United States. 3.6 million. That is not a number. That is a population. That is more people than live in the entire city of Chicago, and behind every filing is a family. A mother packing garbage bags at 6 in the morning. A child asking if they are camping. A father choosing between rent and medication. Real people making impossible choices inside a system that offers no mercy and even less time. 1 in 4 American renters spends more than half of their income on housing. Half. That means a single missed paycheck, a single medical emergency, a single car repair can push a family from stable to evicted in less than 60 days. And once the eviction is filed, the cascade begins. You lose your address. That means your children lose their school enrollment. Lose the school and the child care falls apart. The child care falls apart, and you cannot work the hours your job requires. Lose the hours, and you lose the job. Lose the job, and you lose the income. Your credit score drops because the eviction stays on your record for 7 years, and with a damaged credit score, no landlord will approve your next application. So you end up in a shelter, or a car, or on a sidewalk in February with everything you own in garbage bags. It is not a single failure, it is a chain reaction, and it starts with a door closing behind you. The impact falls heaviest on those who can least afford it. Black women are evicted at twice the rate of white women. Children who experience eviction are 4 times more likely to be hospitalized and twice as likely to drop out of school. The trauma does not end when the family finds a new place. It lives in the body, in the way a child flinches when someone knocks on the door, in the way a mother checks the mailbox with her heart in her throat on the 1st of every month. But here is what the data also shows. Solutions exist. Emergency rental assistance programs. The kind that give a family a few $100s to bridge a gap, prevent homelessness at a fraction of the cost of shelter beds and emergency services. Right to counsel programs, where tenants get free legal representation, reduce successful evictions by up to 70%. Mediation programs, where landlords and tenants sit across a table and actually talk, resolve disputes before they ever reach a courtroom. None of these are radical ideas. None of them require reinventing the system. They just require someone deciding that the people inside the buildings matter as much as the buildings themselves. Miles could not fix a national crisis. He knew that one man with one portfolio could not undo decades of policy failure and structural inequality, and a housing market designed to extract maximum profit from people with minimum options. But he could fix his 14,000 doors. He could change the way his system treated the human beings who called his buildings home. And Tanya Brooks, a woman who had hidden crackers in her daughter's backpack and slept on a gym mat, and called a management company 11 times without a single answer, had shown him exactly where to start. 18 months later, Miles Ashford stood at a podium inside a building he almost did not recognize, 2130 Ridgemont Avenue. Same address, same brick, same 5 stories, but everything else had changed. The front door had a working lock. The hallway lights were on. The walls had been replastered and painted a warm gray that made the space feel like somewhere people lived, not somewhere people survived. The elevator worked. The fire escapes had been repaired, and on the ground floor, where a storage closet used to collect mildew and broken furniture, there was now a community room with folding chairs and a small stage and windows that let in actual daylight. The room was full. Tenants from the building, social workers from 3 organizations, legal aid attorneys, housing advocates, reporters from 2 Philadelphia stations and 1 national outlet, and city council members who had suddenly become very interested in tenant protections now that a billionaire was funding them. Miles had announced the launch of the Open Threshold Initiative, a foundation dedicated to 3 things: emergency housing assistance for families facing eviction, free legal representation for tenants in housing court, and a training program for tenant advocates, people whose entire job was to stand between property management and the human beings living behind the doors. Not charity, infrastructure, not a gift, a correction. Tanya sat in the front row. She wore a simple navy dress she had bought with her own paycheck from Fairmount University Hospital, where she now worked as a licensed practical nurse. Her license was 3 weeks old. She had passed on her first attempt. Naya sat beside her in a yellow dress, her hair braided, holding her mother's hand with the quiet confidence of a child who had finally stopped waiting for the floor to disappear. Malik sat on the other side, holding a piece of paper, a drawing, crayon on white printer paper, a building, 5 stories, square windows, a door with a handle, and above the building, a sun with rays that stretched to every corner of the page. Miles looked out at the room and spoke without notes. "I stood in this hallway a year and a half ago," he said, "and I did not recognize my own building. Not because it had changed, because I had never bothered to look. I owned this building for 7 years and never once walked through the front door. I never met a single tenant. I never asked if the heat worked. I never asked if anyone was safe." He paused. The room was silent. Tanya Brooks forced me to see what I had chosen to ignore. She did not ask for my help. She did not want my pity. She wanted a door that locked and a system that did not throw her children onto a sidewalk because she missed 2 months of rent after 5 years of paying on time. That is not a lot to ask. And the fact that my company could not give her, that is something I will carry for the rest of my life. He announced the advisory board, community members, housing attorneys, social workers, and 1 tenant representative, Tanya Brooks. Tanya walked to the podium. She did not have a speech. She had not prepared remarks or rehearsed in a mirror. She just stood there a moment, looking at a room full of people who were looking back at her, and spoke. "I am not here because I am special," she said. Her voice was steady and clear, the voice of a woman who had slept on a gym mat and kept filling out job applications by hand. "I am here because 3.6 million families go through what I went through every single year. I am just the one who ended up on television." She looked at Miles, then at Nia, then back at the room. Nobody should lose their home because they lost their job for 2 months. Nobody. And if this foundation means that even one mother does not have to explain to her 5-year-old son why they are sleeping in a church basement, then it is worth everything. She stepped down, no applause line, no dramatic exit. She just walked back to her seat and held her daughter's hand. After the event, the reporters left. The council members shook hands and vanished into black cars. The tenants lingered, talking to the advocates, picking up pamphlets, asking questions about the legal aid program. Miles stood near the entrance, watching the room empty slowly. Nia appeared at his side. She tugged on his sleeve the way she always did, gently, like she was asking permission to exist in his space. "Mr. Miles," she said. "Yeah, Nia, my mom said you used to own the building that kicked us out." Miles looked down at her. 11 years old now, taller, sharper, still carrying that backpack everywhere she went, still drawing houses in every notebook. "I did," he said. "But now you are fixing it. I am trying." Nia nodded, thought about it, then looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much and still chose to believe. "Good," she said, "because there is a girl in my class who just lost her apartment too. Her name is Aliyah. She has been staying with her grandma, but her grandma's place is really small. Can you help her?" Miles's throat tightened. Because this was it. This was the whole point. Not the foundation, not the press conference, not the advisory board or the policy changes or the spreadsheets showing reduced eviction rates. A child standing in a hallway asking a grown man to help her friend. The simplest, most human version of the question he should have been asking for 20 years. "Tell me about Aliyah," Miles said, "and we will figure it out." The crisis had not ended. It had not even slowed down. Somewhere in this country right now, a family was being evicted. A mother was packing garbage bags. A child was asking questions that no child should have to ask. But one man had finally stopped looking away, and one mother had shown him that the people inside his buildings were never just leases. They were lives. Months later, Miles sat in the same penthouse. Same table, same chair, same view of Lake Michigan stretching into darkness. The television was on, the same channel, the same news anchor, even the same quiet hour of the evening when dinner is done, and the world narrows down to whatever glows on the screen. But the story was different. A reporter stood outside a building in Philadelphia, 2130 Ridgemont Avenue, and the building behind her was not the one Miles remembered from that February night. The brick had been cleaned. The windows were whole. The fire escapes had been painted, and behind the reporter, on the small playground out back, children were playing, actually playing, running and shouting and doing the things children do when they feel safe enough to be loud. The reporter was covering the Open Threshold initiative. 6 months since launch, 214 families assisted, 87 evictions prevented through legal aid alone, a model that 3 other property companies had quietly begun to study. And then the camera cut to an interview. A woman in hospital scrubs, clean and professional, standing in front of the building with her arms at her sides and her chin lifted, and the kind of calm in her eyes that only comes from having survived something that should have destroyed you and building something better on the other side of it. Tanya Brooks, licensed practical nurse, tenant, advocate, advisory board member, mother of 2. Nobody should lose their home because they lost their job for 2 months, she said into the camera. Nobody. The system is not broken. It is working exactly the way it was designed to work. We just have to redesign it. Miles watched her speak. He watched the building behind her. He watched the children on the swings, and something shifted in his chest. Not a crack this time, not a fracture. Something settling. Something finding its right place for the first time. He picked up the remote and pressed the button. The screen went black, but this time he did not turn off the television because the image was unbearable. He turned it off because he was smiling. Because for the first time in his life, what was on the news had something to do with him in a way that did not require lawyers or spin or damage control. Just truth, just change, just proof that one decision made on one night in one penthouse could ripple outward until it reached a playground where children were safe enough to be loud. He sat in the silence. The penthouse was still large, still mostly empty. The dining table still seated 14. The wine cellar still held its bottles. The lake outside was still black and endless, but the silence felt different now. For 20 years, his father's voice had filled these rooms, that low, certain whisper that told him. Sentiment was weakness, tenants were numbers, compassion was a luxury he could not afford. Tonight, the voice was gone, not forgotten. Miles would never forget his father. But the recording had been overwritten, replaced by other voices. Nia asking, "But now you are fixing it." Tanya saying, "I do not need your pity, I need a door that locks." Malik asking, "Is this our home for real?" Estelle saying she did not deserve what they did to her, none of us do. Those were the voices that lived in his walls now, and they were louder than anything Silas Ashford had ever said. Miles Ashford had built an empire that made people invisible. It took one woman on a news screen to make him see. The eviction he had watched that February night was not just a story. It was a mirror, and for the first time in his life, he did not look away. He had thought he was watching someone else's crisis. He had been watching his own failure, and the moment he recognized this address, it stopped being just his building. It became his responsibility. It always had been. The screen was dark. The penthouse was quiet. Somewhere in Philadelphia, Tanya Brooks was putting her children to bed in an apartment with a lock on the door and heat that worked, and walls that did not let the wind in. Somewhere in that same building, Estelle Monroe was asleep in a unit with a fixed radiator and a ceiling that no longer leaked. And somewhere in a classroom, a girl named Nia was drawing another house, square walls, triangle roof, door with a handle, and a sun in the corner. Always a sun. Now, before you go, I want to be honest with you for a moment. This story is fiction. Miles Ashford and Tanya Brooks are not real people. I made them up. The names, the buildings, the conversations, none of it happened exactly the way I told it. But the crisis is real. Every number I mentioned in this story is documented. The 3.6 million eviction filings per year come from the research of the Eviction Lab at Princeton University, one of the most comprehensive projects on housing instability in this country. The racial disparities, the impact on children, the 60-day spiral from stable to homeless, all of that is real. The National Low-Income Housing Coalition tracks it. The data is public. You can look it up tonight. I wrote this story because I believe the way we talk about poverty matters. We say people lost their home as if they misplaced it somewhere, as if it slipped behind the couch. They did not lose it. Systems failed them. Landlords looked away. Management companies pressed a button, and the rest of us changed the channel. If this story made you uncomfortable, good. Discomfort is where change begins. Not policy papers, not statistics, not speeches at conferences. Discomfort. The kind that sits in your chest after you hear a 5-year-old ask his mother if they are camping. The kind that makes you wonder how many families like Tanya's live in your city right now, tonight, filling out job applications by hand on a shelter floor. So let me tell you what I actually believe. Because I did not write this to make you feel something for 10 minutes and then move on. I believe the opposite of cruelty is not kindness. Kindness is easy. Kindness is a sandwich handed over at a shelter door. Kindness lets us feel good and leave. The opposite of cruelty is attention. The decision to keep your eyes on the person the system is trying to turn into a number. Miles did not save Tanya by being generous. He saved her by finally paying attention, and then by rebuilding the machine so that attention was required by design, not left to the mood of whoever happened to be working that shift. And I believe the word charity is often a way of dodging a harder word. Tanya said it best in the note Miles left her. This is not charity. This is what was owed. Charity is what we give when we want the credit. Justice is what we return when we finally admit we took something. They can look identical from the outside, and they are not the same act at all. If you or someone you know is facing eviction, call 211. It is a national hotline that connects you to local housing resources, emergency rental assistance, and legal aid. Most states have legal aid societies that offer free representation for tenants in housing court. You do not have to face it alone, and you do not have to figure it out without help. The system is hard, but there are people fighting to make it less hard, and knowing they exist is the first step. So what do you actually walk away with tonight? Not guilt, because guilt is useless. Guilt is only Miles at his dinner table before he stood up. Here is what I would ask you to carry instead. First, learn the number 211 and save it, because the person who needs it one day may not be you. It may be the coworker who suddenly goes quiet about the weekend, or the neighbor whose windows go dark early. Second, look at the systems you benefit from and ask one honest question. Whose face have I arranged not to see? You do not have to fix it tonight. You only have to stop pretending the bottom floor is not there. Third, when someone near you falls behind, offer time before you offer advice. Most people who are drowning do not need a lecture on swimming. They need someone to stop the clock for 60 days. And fourth, if you ever hold power over other people's lives, as a landlord, a manager, a decision maker, build the attention into the structure. Do not trust your own good intentions to survive a busy Tuesday. Make the mercy mechanical so that it happens even on the days you forget to care. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story hit you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Not for the algorithm, for the conversation. Because the more we talk about this, the harder it becomes to look away. Respect is not owed to the loudest name on the building. It is owed to every quiet family living behind its doors. And a home, in the end, was never just an address. It was proof that someone believed you were worth keeping.